Nobody told them the truth. Nobody sat them down and said, "This is actually how it works." This is what separates the person who spends their 20s wishing and complaining from the one who spends their 30s wealthy, free, and completely unbothered by what anyone thinks of them. So here it is, unfiltered. No comfort, no applause, just the mechanics of how a broke, average, ordinary person builds something extraordinary, and why most of them never will. The truth is this: the life they want already exists. It's sitting right there on the other side of a very specific set of decisions. Decisions most people refuse to make, not because they can't, because they won't. They won't get up when they don't feel like it. They won't say no when everyone around them is saying yes. They won't stay in on Friday night. They won't skip the vacation. They won't eat the boring meal, wear the cheap clothes, drive the old car. And then they wonder why nothing changes. This is not a video about motivation. Motivation is temporary. This is a video about construction, about building the kind of person who doesn't need to feel ready, because they've already built the systems, habits, and mental architecture that make success inevitable. What follows are truths that most people cannot handle. And that's fine, because most people are not the target of this message. The ones who are, they know who they are. Somewhere along the way, a very dangerous idea got planted into the minds of an entire generation. The idea was this: wait until you're ready. Go to school. Get comfortable. Get stable. Get your life together. Then, when everything is lined up perfectly, take your shot. This idea has destroyed more potential than any lack of talent, any economic recession, any broken family or bad neighborhood ever could. Because readiness is a myth. The person waiting to feel ready is the person who never starts. They wait for the perfect moment. They wait for the business idea to be foolproof. They wait for the side hustle to be guaranteed before they build it. They wait for the relationship to be certain before they invest. They wait for the market to be stable before they enter it. And while they wait, someone else, someone less educated, less talented, less prepared, just starts. That person makes mistakes, publicly, embarrassingly. They look foolish. People laugh. But they keep going. They adjust. They learn in real time. And 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, they're operating at a level the waiter hasn't even begun to approach. The world does not reward preparation. It rewards motion, imperfect, uncomfortable, terrifying motion. Most people confuse learning with doing. They consume content instead of creating output. They read about business instead of running one. They watch entrepreneurs on YouTube instead of making the first sale. They feel productive because they are constantly absorbing information. But information without execution is just expensive entertainment. There is a different kind of person. And this person operates from a completely different assumption. They assume they will figure it out on the way. Not before they leave. On the way. This is not recklessness. This is calculated trust in one's own ability to solve problems under pressure. And that trust, interestingly, is only built through pressure. It cannot be simulated. It cannot be studied. It can only be earned by surviving the discomfort of going before you're ready. The first lesson is simple. There is no arriving at readiness. There is only going and becoming ready through the act of going. Start ugly. Start small. Start scared. Just start. Every time someone chooses comfort over growth, they're making a trade. They just don't realize it. When a person hits snooze, they are trading 1 hour of productive morning for 9 minutes of low-quality half-sleep. When they scroll social media for 90 minutes before bed, they are trading clarity and recovery for a dopamine drip that leaves them more anxious than before. When they spend the weekend with people who have no ambition, no hunger, no vision, they are trading the possibility of who they could become for the comfort of who they currently are. Every single choice is a trade, and most people are making terrible trades every hour of every day, while simultaneously wondering why they can't seem to get ahead. Life is not a lottery. Life is a ledger, and every decision, no matter how small, is either an asset or a liability. The dangerous thing about bad trades is that they don't announce themselves. They disguise themselves as rest, as fun, as living life, as balance. Now, balance is real. Rest is real. Joy is real. But there is a difference between genuine restoration and willful avoidance. Most people know the difference. They feel it. They just don't say it out loud because saying it out loud would mean confronting it. Here is a question that cuts through everything. If someone filmed a documentary of the last 7 days of a person's life, every hour, every decision, every distraction, and played it back on a screen, would that person be proud of what they see? Or would they be embarrassed? Not embarrassed because they failed at something. Embarrassed because they didn't even try. Because they spent 10 hours watching content about success and 0 hours doing something that creates it. The honest audit is the beginning of change, and most people refuse to do it. Not because they don't know how, because they already know what they'll find. The person who builds real wealth, real freedom, real options in their life, that person has made peace with doing things they don't feel like doing. Not sometimes. Consistently. Not when they're inspired, especially when they're not. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is a practiced behavior. And like all practiced behaviors, it strengthens with repetition. Every time someone does the hard thing when the easy option is available, they are building a version of themselves that is capable of doing harder things at the future. Every time they choose the easy thing, they are building the opposite. The trades compound in both directions. Most people are not broke because they don't make enough money. They're broke because they never learned what money actually is. They were taught to earn it, spend it, and hope there's some left over. Nobody taught them the mechanics. Nobody taught them how a dollar can be used to produce more dollars. Not through luck, not through speculation, through systems. Here is the fundamental truth about wealth. Wealthy people do not primarily trade time for money. Broke people do. The entire architecture of a broke person's financial life is built on this single equation: work hours equal income. Which means the moment the hours stop, the income stops. But wealth doesn't work like that. Wealth is built by creating or acquiring assets that generate income independently of time worked. A business, a brand, a product, a portfolio, a skill set that scales beyond one person's hours. The goal is never to get rich. The goal is to build something that generates value at scale, and then wealth becomes a byproduct. The first money principle is this: spend less than they earn. This sounds obvious. It is obvious. And almost nobody does it consistently. Because spending feels good. Spending is socially rewarded. The new car earns respect from neighbors. The expensive dinner earns likes on social media. The designer clothes signal status. But every dollar that goes toward impressing other people is a dollar that cannot compound into independence. The second principle: save to invest, not save to save. A savings account is not a wealth-building tool. It is an emergency fund. It is a holding tank. Money sitting in a low-interest account is not growing. It is technically shrinking due to inflation. The goal is to move money from income into assets as quickly as possible. The third principle: revenue solves almost every problem. Most people try to cut their way to wealth. They track every dollar. They eliminate every subscription. They eat cheap. This is not wrong, but it is a ceiling. There is a limit to how much someone can cut. There is no limit to how much they can earn. The person who can generate an extra $500 a month from a skill or a service has more financial power than the one who cut $300 from their budget. Earning more creates options. Cutting alone creates scarcity thinking, and scarcity thinking is one of the most expensive mental habits a person can carry. The fourth principle: leverage is the multiplier. This is where the game changes. Leverage means using a tool, capital, people, systems, software, media, to create output that exceeds what one person working alone could produce. The internet is the greatest leverage mechanism in human history. Someone with a laptop and a skill can reach millions of people at essentially zero additional cost per person. This is why a 23-year-old with no MBA, no investment banker uncle, no trust fund, can build a 7-figure business in 2 years. Not because they're extraordinary, because they understood leverage and used it. The people who win financially are not smarter than everyone else. They are not more talented. They simply understood the mechanics early and then played the game at scale. Learn the mechanics, then play at scale. Most people believe their problem is effort. They think if they could just work harder, push more, grind longer, the results would follow. And there is truth in that, up to a point. But hard work applied in the wrong direction just gets someone lost faster. The deeper problem is identity. What a person believes about themselves determines every decision they make, every risk they'll take, every discomfort they'll absorb, every version of success they believe they're allowed to have. A person who fundamentally sees themselves as someone who struggles with money will find a way to struggle with money, regardless of how much comes in. The person who wins the lottery and is broke again in 5 years. The athlete who earns $50 million and files for bankruptcy. The problem was never the income, it was the identity. Who someone believes they are is the ceiling of what they will allow themselves to achieve. This is not abstract. This is neuroscience. The brain is a pattern-matching machine. It is constantly working to confirm whatever beliefs it already holds. When a person holds the belief that they are not someone who succeeds at business, their brain will filter out opportunities, unconsciously sabotage progress, and interpret every setback as confirmation of that belief. This is why affirmations alone don't work, because telling oneself something different without actually doing something different does not change the underlying belief. The brain knows the difference. Identity changes through evidence, specifically through small acts of integrity. When someone makes a commitment to themselves, even a tiny one, and then keeps it, they generate evidence that they are someone who keeps commitments. When they repeat this, the evidence accumulates, and over time, the identity begins to shift. Not because they said something different, because they did something different, repeatedly. This is the real purpose of morning routines, workout habits, and daily disciplines. It's not about the productivity points, it's about the votes. Every completed rep is a vote for a new identity. Every abandoned rep is a vote for the old one. The question is not, what does someone want to achieve? The question is, who does someone need to become to make achieving that thing inevitable? Because if the identity is right, the behavior follows naturally. But if the identity is wrong, no amount of motivation will sustain the behavior long enough to matter. The most dangerous sentence a person can say is, "That's just not how I am," because it is almost never true. It is almost always a story built from old evidence, old environments, old comparisons. A story that feels true because it's been rehearsed so many times. But stories can be rewritten, not all at once, sentence by sentence, choice by choice, day by day. The identity they carry today is not permanent. It is just the most recent version, and the next version is available the moment they decide to vote for it. There is a cost to playing it safe that nobody talks about. They talk about the cost of taking risks. They quantify it. They catastrophize it. They map out every possible way something could go wrong and use that map as the reason they never leave the house. But they rarely apply the same analysis to the alternative. What is the actual cost of playing it safe? Of staying in the job that pays enough but kills the soul slowly, of staying in the city that's comfortable but never challenging, of staying in the relationship that's familiar but has no future, of never starting the business, never making the video, never writing the book, never making the call. The cost is enormous. It's just spread out invisibly over years. The risk of doing something is visible and immediate. The risk of doing nothing is invisible and slow, which makes it feel safe. But it is not safe. It is just a slower way of arriving at the same place of regret. Ask someone who is 60 years old about their regrets, not their failures, their regrets. Almost universally, they will not name the things they tried and didn't work out. They will name the things they wanted to try and never did. The startup they didn't launch. The conversation they didn't have. The leap they didn't take. This is not a small observation. This is the central data point of a life well lived or a life survived. And the tragedy is that the people who choose safety are not doing so out of laziness. Most of them are working very hard. They are working hard within a boundary that feels safe. They are maximizing within a container that is too small. The boldest thing someone can do is to honestly assess whether the container they are operating in is the right one, whether the ceiling they're bumping up against is real or imagined, whether the walls are made of concrete or of old beliefs. Most containers are built by other people. Parents who meant well but had limited vision. Teachers who graded for compliance rather than creativity. Peers who mocked ambition because it made them uncomfortable. Society that defined success narrowly. Steady job, steady paycheck, steady life. Breaking out of a container someone else built is not ungrateful. It is necessary, because no one else is going to live the life that gets spent inside it. Taking a calculated risk means gathering information, making a plan, limiting downside, and then going. It does not mean gambling recklessly. It does not mean burning everything down. But it does mean moving. It does mean discomfort. It does mean moments of genuine uncertainty where the outcome is not guaranteed. That's not a bug. That's the feature. Because the uncertainty is what makes it real. The uncertainty is what makes the growth possible. And the growth is the whole point. There is a skill that the successful all have that most people are embarrassed to admit they lack. The skill of selling. Not in the used car salesman manipulative high-pressure sense. In the genuine, clear, confident communication of value sense. Every person on the planet sells every single day. They sell their ideas to their boss. They sell their personality to potential friends. They sell their vision to potential partners. They sell their work to employers. They sell their character to the world. The people who pretend they don't sell, they just sell badly. The ability to communicate clearly, to articulate value, to make someone else see what you see. This is the single highest leverage skill available to any human being, and most people have never deliberately developed it. They were taught that selling is beneath them, that if they were truly talented, their work would speak for itself, that wanting to be seen is vanity, and marketing is manipulation. This belief has kept more talented people invisible and broke than almost any other single belief. The best product does not automatically win. The best marketed product wins. The best communicated idea wins. The person who can walk into a room and make others feel genuinely understood and then show them how something specific helps them, that person wins every time. Learning to sell begins with learning to listen, not listening to respond, listening to understand. What does someone actually want? What is the problem they need solved? What outcome would change their life? The moment someone stops pitching their thing and starts solving someone else's problem, selling becomes effortless because it's no longer selling, it's helping. The second component is clarity. Most people communicate in a fog. They use too many words. They explain too much. They hedge every statement. They apologize for their own value. A clear communicator says the thing once, directly, with confidence. They do not talk around the point. They do not preface their request with 17 qualifiers. They say what they mean, ask for what they want, and then stop talking. This is uncomfortable for people who were raised to be agreeable, to not take up space, to shrink rather than assert. But assertiveness is not aggression. Confidence is not arrogance. Clarity is not rudeness. The person who learns to communicate with confidence and clarity will outperform their more talented, more educated counterparts who never developed this skill every single time. This is not optional. This is table stakes. Build the skill. Practice it relentlessly. Get uncomfortable asking for things. Get comfortable being told no. The no is just information, and information is always useful. The most expensive belief that exists in popular culture is this: failure means something is wrong with you. It is the reason people quit after the first rejection, why they abandon a business after the first bad month, why they stop creating after the first harsh comment, why they give up on a skill before they become competent at it, because they have conflated the outcome of an attempt with the worth of the person attempting. These are not the same thing. A failed launch is not a failed person. A rejected proposal is not a rejected identity. A bad quarter is not a bad life. Failure is just data. And data, when studied honestly, is the most valuable resource in the world. It tells you exactly what didn't work so you can figure out what will. The most successful people in any field have one thing in common that's rarely discussed. They failed more than everyone else. Not in spite of their success, as a precondition to it. They pitched more and got rejected more. They built more products that flopped. They made more bets that didn't pay off. They published more content that nobody watched. They sent more emails that bounced. And because they kept going through each failure, they accumulated data that their competitors didn't have. They learned what the market actually responded to versus what they assumed it would. They learned which version of their pitch worked, which content format held attention, which offer converted. Failure is the curriculum, and the enrollment fee is willingness to feel bad temporarily. The problem is that failure feels final. It feels like a verdict. It feels like proof of the worst things believed about oneself. And because it feels that way, people avoid it, sometimes so aggressively that they never expose themselves to any situation where failure is possible. Which means they never expose themselves to any situation where success is possible. The reframe is this: every failure is a step closer to the version that works, not a step backward, a step through. The fastest path to success is maximum iterations. Every iteration that doesn't work eliminates a variable. Every eliminated variable narrows the path to the one that does. Stop mourning failed attempts. Document them. Study them. Ask 3 specific questions. What worked? What didn't? What would be done differently next time? Then apply the answers and go again. The person who processes failure this way becomes iteratively unstoppable because they are not being defeated by failure. They are being educated by it. That's not resilience. That's a competitive advantage. There is something that shapes human behavior more powerfully than motivation, discipline, or willpower. It's environment, the people someone is surrounded by, the content they consume, the physical spaces they spend time in, the conversations they're exposed to daily, the standards that are considered normal in their world. These things, not inspiration, not hustle, determine what becomes possible and what becomes invisible. Put an ambitious person in a room full of people who mock ambition, and within 6 months, they'll either leave or become quieter. Put an average person in a room full of people who are building something real, working hard, and holding each other accountable, and within a year, that person will be unrecognizable. A person cannot consistently outperform their environment. The environment sets the standard, and the standard determines what behaviors feel normal. This is why the conversation about who someone is spending time with is not about being judgmental or elitist. It is a purely practical question. If the 5 people someone is closest to have no ambition, no financial discipline, no long-term vision, it will take a supernatural amount of energy for that person to sustain these things alone, because the environment is constantly pulling. Every conversation about why it's okay to stay comfortable, every example of someone cutting corners without consequence, every moment of collective mediocrity normalized as just how things are. Changing the environment is sometimes the hardest thing someone will do, because environments are social, and changing them means changing relationships. And changing relationships means disappointing people who are used to a particular version of who someone is. But this discomfort is not optional. It is the cost of growth. Beyond the social environment, there's the information environment. What someone consumes determines what they think about. What they think about determines what they believe is possible. What they believe is possible determines what they will attempt. An hour of high-quality, specific, practical content beats 5 hours of passive entertainment every single day. Not because entertainment is evil, but because the mind is always learning something. The question is whether what's being learned is moving in the direction of who someone wants to become. Design the environment deliberately. Choose the social circle deliberately. Curate the information diet deliberately. Because the environment will do its work regardless. The only choice is whether it works for them or against them. A generation ago, building a business required capital, physical space, inventory, staff, distribution relationships. The barriers were real and high, and they kept most people out. That world is gone. Today, an individual with a skill, a clear message, and the willingness to be consistent in public can build a business that generates more income than a law firm partner in a fraction of the time, and with almost zero infrastructure. This is not a fantasy. This is happening in real time across every industry, every niche, every country. And yet most people still operate as though they are stuck in 1995. They believe the only path is the traditional one. School to job to slow promotion to eventual comfort. The most powerful business model in modern history is a personal brand built on genuine expertise, delivered with consistency, and monetized through high-value products or services. One person, one area of mastery, one platform, massive leverage. Here is how it actually works. Step 1. Someone has a skill or a specific area of knowledge that is genuinely valuable. This does not mean they have to be the best in the world. They need to be meaningfully better or more useful than the person they are speaking to. That gap is what creates value. Step 2. They document and communicate that skill publicly. Consistently, not perfectly. Consistently. A video every week, a post every day, a newsletter every month. Something that builds a body of work, a trail of evidence that says, this person knows what they're talking about. Step 3. They build an audience of people who have a specific problem that their skill solves. This audience is not built overnight. It is built through years of showing up, being useful, and refusing to quit when the numbers are small. Step 4. They create a product or service that solves that problem at a higher level of depth or support. A course, a coaching program, a community, a tool, a service. Something that takes the person from where they are to where they want to be. Step 5. They sell that product clearly and without apology. They communicate its value. They make the offer. They handle the objections. They close. This is not complicated. It is simple. And like most simple things, the simplicity is deceptive, because executing it requires sustained discipline over a long enough timeline that most people will quit before the results are visible. The average content creator quits before they hit 1,000 followers. The ones who stay, who keep going past that, who survive the phase where it feels like shouting into nothing, those are the ones who eventually build something real. The barrier to entry is not talent, it's patience. Sustained, intelligent, consistent patience. Most people overestimate what they can build in a year, and dramatically underestimate what they can build in 5. Nobody talks about this enough. The ability to say no is one of the most financially and personally valuable skills a person can build, and most people are terrible at it. They say yes to the social event they don't want to attend because they're afraid of being disliked. They say yes to the project that doesn't align with their goals because it pays okay and feels safe. They say yes to the favor, the obligation, the demand on their time, and then wonder why they have no time left for what actually matters. Focus is not about doing more. Focus is about relentlessly eliminating everything that doesn't compound toward the specific outcome being built. The word no is not rude. It is not selfish. It is a declaration of priorities. And a person without clear priorities will say yes to everyone else's. Here's the test. Does this thing, this task, this commitment, this social obligation move the most important goal forward, or does it simply feel like the right thing to do in the moment? Good enough options are the enemy of great ones, because good enough options are abundant. Great ones require space, space that most people have filled with good enough. The entrepreneur who tries to build 5 businesses simultaneously doesn't build 5 businesses. They build 5 bad versions of something that could have been excellent if they had picked one and gone all in. The creator who is on every platform trying to reach every audience doesn't dominate any platform. They spread themselves thin across all of them, mediocre everywhere. The person trying to maintain every old friendship while building a new life doesn't build the new life with full attention. They maintain the old one while half building the new one. Depth beats breadth. Almost every time, in business, in relationships, in skill development, in content. The people who win are the ones who pick the thing, the one platform, the one skill, the one niche, the one type of customer, and go so deep that they become impossible to ignore. This requires saying no to nearly everything else. And that is the hard part, because saying no feels like closing doors. But the truth is that every yes to the wrong thing is a no to the right one. The word no is not an ending. It is a defense of priorities. And priorities in the life of someone building something are everything. The most powerful competitive advantage available to any person trying to build wealth, a business, or a life they're proud of is so obvious and so underused that it barely registers as a strategy. Playing a longer game than everyone else. The average person operates on a monthly time frame. They want results this month. They want the business to be profitable this quarter. They want the content to go viral this week. They want the body to transform in 30 days. And because the world doesn't consistently deliver results on that timeline, they quit. They try something else. They pivot. They start over. They blame the strategy. They blame the platform. They blame the market. But the strategy wasn't wrong. The timeline was. Compound growth is mathematically counterintuitive. In the early phase, almost nothing seems to be happening. In the later phase, the results become too large to believe. The difference between the person who wins and the one who quits is almost always timing. The quitter leaves right before the curve steepens. Consider a skill. The first year of learning almost anything, the progress is slow, often invisible. The practitioner is still figuring out the fundamentals. They make mistakes. Their output is mediocre. They compare themselves to people years ahead of them and feel inadequate. But the person who stays, who practices deliberately, gets feedback, improves iteratively, hits a threshold somewhere in the second or third year where things begin to click. The skill starts to feel natural. The output quality jumps. The applications multiply. By year 5, they are operating at a level that seems supernatural to someone watching from the outside. But it's not supernatural. It's compound progress over an honest timeline. The same applies to business. The same applies to investing. The same applies to relationships. The same applies to health. The problem is that most people are not willing to be bad at something for long enough to become good at it. The discomfort of the early phase, the mediocrity, the invisibility, the uncertainty, is too painful. So they exit. The ones who don't exit build advantages that are nearly impossible to replicate, because the experience, the network, the reputation, the compounded learning, these cannot be purchased. They can only be accumulated over time. The long game is not glamorous. It doesn't make for a compelling social media story. Nobody posts about the 5th consecutive year of showing up before it got exciting. But it's the only game that actually ends in freedom. The word sacrifice has been poisoned by culture. It has been framed as loss, as suffering, as something painful done for the benefit of others. And because it carries that framing, the natural response is to minimize it, avoid it, apologize for it. But there's a different framing, a more accurate one. Sacrifice is not loss. Sacrifice is investment with deferred returns. When someone sacrifices the weekend party to work on their business, they are not losing the party. They are investing the time the party would have cost into an asset that will pay dividends for years. When someone sacrifices the comfortable job for the uncertain venture, they are not losing security. They are investing that security into something with asymmetric upside. Every meaningful thing ever built was built on a foundation of sacrifices that didn't feel romantic in the moment. They felt like loss, like missing out, like being different. But they were deposits, and deposits compound. The generation that grew up online has a complicated relationship with this. Because online, the curated version of success is visible. The result is visible. The party, the purchase, the vacation, the trophy. But the years of sacrifice that preceded it are invisible. The 6 a.m. workouts before anyone was watching. The nights spent learning instead of celebrating. The capital that was reinvested instead of spent. The discomfort that was chosen over comfort, month after month, year after year. This creates a distorted picture, a picture where success looks like it arrived suddenly, without cost. And that distortion leads people to measure their sacrifice against someone else's highlight reel and conclude that they are falling behind. They are not falling behind. They are in the phase that doesn't photograph well. The sacrifice phase is not the consolation prize. It is the construction phase. It is where the foundation is poured, and every structure stands or falls based on the quality of its foundation. Some things take 3 years, some take 5, some take a decade. And that timeline cannot be shortened by desire, only by intelligent, sustained effort over the appropriate duration. The question that cuts through all of this is straightforward. What is someone willing to give up for the life they say they want? Not what they're willing to work for, what they're willing to give up. Because the giving up is just as important as the showing up. And the honest answer to that question tells someone everything about how serious they actually are. Everyone is waiting for a mentor, a wise, experienced, generous person who spots their potential, takes them under their wing, shares their secrets, and shortcuts their journey by a decade. This mentor exists in movies, in books, in the mythology of success. In reality, mentors are not assigned. They are attracted. Successful people, people who have built something real, are busy. They have limited time and unlimited demands on it. They do not randomly invest in people who want to extract value from them. They invest in people who have already demonstrated that they are serious, who have already done the unsexy early phase work, who already show up, already execute, already bring something to the table. The formula is not find a mentor, get knowledge, become successful. The formula is become the kind of person who attracts mentorship by doing what others won't until others see what they can't. This means the primary investment is not in finding the right people. It's in becoming the right person, a person of value, of demonstrated discipline, of clear and stated goals, of consistent execution. The good news is that the barrier to learning from the best minds in any field has never been lower. The books, the podcasts, the interviews, the online courses. 20 years ago, this information was either inaccessible or incredibly expensive. Now it costs practically nothing. The person who claims they can't find a mentor is usually the person who hasn't yet maximized every free and accessible resource available to them. The mentor they're waiting for has probably already written the book, recorded the podcast, and shared the framework for free. And the person hasn't consumed it yet because consuming is less romantic than imagining. Start with the models. Study people who have done what needs to be done, not their lifestyle, their decisions, their frameworks, their sequences. What did they do first? What did they do when it went wrong? What did they say no to? Then apply what works in the specific context. Because context matters enormously. Someone else's playbook, copied without adaptation, will usually underperform. The principles transfer. The exact execution often doesn't. And when a real mentor does appear, be the person worth their time. Not because of credentials or connections or charm, because of execution, because the work speaks before the pitch does. That is how real mentorship relationships begin, not from a cold ask, but from a track record that cannot be argued with. Comparison is one of the most destructive forces in the life of someone trying to build something. Not because it's wrong to observe others, but because most people compare in the wrong direction, outward, instead of the only direction that actually matters. Comparing oneself to someone else's result is comparing a different timeline, a different starting point, a different context, a different set of advantages and disadvantages that are largely invisible. It is an apples to submarines comparison dressed up as something meaningful, and it almost always produces one of two toxic outcomes. Either false superiority, looking down at people who are behind and feeling unearned confidence, or crippling inadequacy, looking up at people who are ahead and feeling like progress is impossible. The only comparison that produces useful data is the comparison between who someone is today and who they were yesterday. That is the only competition worth entering. This is not a soft self-help platitude. This is a strategic choice, because the internal standard is entirely within someone's control. The external comparison is not. Someone working on their business, comparing themselves to a competitor who started 5 years earlier, has more funding, and a larger team, is comparing themselves to a future version of themselves. That comparison produces nothing but discouragement. But that same person comparing today's output to yesterday's output, evaluating whether they communicated better, sold better, produced more, learned more, that is information they can act on. That is a metric they control. The internal standard also protects against the mediocrity trap. Because when the only competition is external, people tend to stop once they surpass a visible benchmark. Once they're doing better than the average person in their circle, the drive often softens. The urgency fades. But a person committed to an internal standard does not stop because they're ahead of others. They continue because they haven't yet reached their own standard, and that standard keeps moving, which means growth never stops. This is the mindset of the top performer in every field, not competitive in the zero-sum sense, competitive in the self-referential sense, relentlessly trying to be better than the previous version of themselves. Set the standard internally, measure daily, adjust constantly, and refuse, absolutely refuse, to let someone else's timeline define what's possible. Here is where this ends, and where everything else begins. Everything discussed in this video, the identity shift, the financial mechanics, the sales skill, the sacrifice, the environment, the long game, none of it is complicated. None of it requires extraordinary intelligence. None of it is reserved for a specific type of person born into a specific kind of life. It is all available, right now, to anyone willing to apply it. But there is a decision that has to be made first, and the decision is not about strategy, it's about seriousness. How serious is someone about the life they say they want? Not in theory, in behavior, in choices made at 6 a.m. when no one is watching, in what happens after the first failure, in whether the hard conversation gets had or avoided, in whether the investment gets made or the comfort is chosen instead. The world is extraordinarily generous to the person who makes a genuine, sustained, committed decision. Not the kind of decision that lasts until it gets hard. The kind that holds when it's hard, when it's slow, when it's uncertain, when it feels like it's not working. That level of commitment is rare, rarer than talent, rarer than intelligence, rarer than opportunity. And that's exactly why the person who maintains it wins. Not because the world rewards fairness, because the world rewards persistence. Because persistence, applied intelligently over time, is the only force that consistently outperforms every other variable. Most people reading this, watching this, hearing this, they feel it right now. The resonance, the recognition. Something in them knows that this is the truth they've been circling around. But feeling it and acting on it are separated by something small and enormous at the same time. A choice. Not a big, dramatic, cinematic choice. A quiet one. Made in private. Made right now, today. Before the feeling fades and the comfort of the familiar pulls them back. The choice is simply this. Am I actually going to do this? Or am I going to keep consuming content about it? One path leads to the life described in this video. Not easily, not quickly, but certainly, if sustained. The other path leads back to the same place they've already been, with a new video, a new feeling, and no new result. The choice has always been available. It's still available right now. The only question that has ever mattered, is what they will choose to do next.